The strangest part about betrayal is this. Sometimes the person who leaves you starts mourning you before you're even dead. That's what I realized the morning I learned my wife held a memorial service for me while I was still breathing through a machine in St. Joseph Medical Center outside Denver. My name is Ethan Walker, 39 years old, construction project manager. Born in Colorado, raised on black coffee, snow tires, and the belief that if you showed up for your family every day, eventually life showed up for you too. For 12 years, I believe Claire Walker was the best thing that ever happened to me. She had this way of laughing with her whole body, like joy physically moved through her. Even during the hard years, the layoffs, the 70-hour work weeks, the nights I came home smelling like concrete dust and diesel fuel, she used to wait up for me in that little yellow kitchen with the porch light still on. I built my entire life around that light. Funny how memory works after betrayal. Your mind becomes a detective. Every smile turns suspicious. Every touch feels rehearsed. Every happy moment starts sounding hollow when you replay it at 3 in the morning. The accident happened on Interstate 70 during freezing rain in late November. I remember headlights sliding sideways through the dark. I remember my truck hydroplaning near the median. Then nothing, just silence. The kind so deep it doesn't even feel human anymore. According to doctors, I was in a coma for almost 7 months. 7 months where machines breathed for me while the rest of the world kept moving. Nurses later told me Claire visited almost every day during the first few weeks. She cried beside my bed, held my hand, talked about faith and miracles and second chances. At least that's what everyone believed. But people only tell the truth in public until exhaustion makes lying inconvenient. By month 3, her visits got shorter. By month 4, she stopped wearing her wedding ring. By month 5, she stopped coming entirely. My younger brother Mason was the one who stayed. He slept in vinyl hospital chairs that squeaked every time he shifted. He argued with insurance companies. He signed paperwork. He shaved my face when the beard got too wild because he said I looked less dead that way. Mason told me later there was one afternoon he walked into my hospital room and found Claire standing near the window staring at the mountains outside. Quiet, cold, detached, like she was already somewhere else in her mind. He asked her if she was okay. She looked at me lying there unconscious and said something he never forgot. I can't keep living like a widow for a man who isn't technically dead. 3 days later, she emptied our joint accounts. 2 weeks after that, she sold the house. Then came the memorial service. Not a funeral, no body, just photographs, sympathy casseroles, folded tissues, and people speaking about me in past tense while my heart monitor still beat 2 counties away. Mason found out because an old family friend posted photos online. White flowers, gray skies, Claire dressed in black with her hand resting on another man's arm. When Mason showed me those pictures months later, after I finally woke up, something inside me didn't break. It simply disappeared. Waking up after 7 months does not feel inspiring the way movies pretend it does. It feels confusing, heavy, like your soul returned before your body was ready to carry it again. The first thing I remember clearly was the sound of snow tapping against the hospital window. Soft little clicks against the glass while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like tired insects. My throat burned from the breathing tube they had removed 2 days earlier. My muscles felt borrowed. Even lifting my hand off the blanket looked like hard labor. Mason sat beside the bed wearing the same Carhartt jacket he always wore during Colorado winters, elbows faded white from years of work. He looked older than I remembered. Stress ages good men faster than time ever could. When he realized I was fully awake, his eyes watered for half a second before he forced a smile. "You scared the hell out of us," he said quietly. Funny thing was, by then there was no us anymore. Claire had already erased that word from existence. Recovery teaches you humiliating things about being human. A nurse helping you walk 10 feet can make you feel 90 years old. Holding a plastic cup without spilling suddenly feels like a personal victory. Every day became small battles. Bend your knees. Grip the rail. Take another breath. I used to manage multi-million-dollar construction projects with 2 phones buzzing in my pocket while crews waited for my decisions. Now I celebrated buttoning my own flannel shirt without assistance. Life can reduce a man down to basics faster than pride can keep up. Mason avoided talking about Claire at first. I could see it every time her name hovered near the room, like smoke neither of us wanted to breathe in. But silence has weight. Eventually, it crushes whatever sits beneath it. One afternoon, while pale winter sunlight stretched across the floor tiles, I finally asked him the question directly. Where is she? He stared at the coffee in his hands for a long time before answering. Gone. Just one word. Flat. Exhausted. Honest. Then came the rest. The divorce paperwork filed while I was unconscious. The house sold 6 weeks later. The life insurance inquiries. The new man. Apparently his name was Daniel Reeves. Real estate broker. Expensive watches. Perfect teeth. The kind of guy who probably never scraped ice off a windshield before dawn in his life. Mason said Claire moved to Scottsdale, Arizona not long after the memorial service. Warmer weather. New start. New relationship. New life. While I was relearning how to walk without trembling, my wife had apparently mastered moving on. I asked Mason if Claire ever tried contacting me after I woke up. He looked away immediately. That told me everything before he even spoke. No, he admitted quietly. The room felt colder after that. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just empty. Like hearing the final nail slide into place on something that had already been buried for months. Later that night, long after nurses dimmed the hallway lights, I sat awake listening to heart monitors beep through the darkness. Hospitals never truly sleep. Somewhere down the corridor, a television murmured low beneath rolling cart wheels and distant footsteps. I stared at the ceiling thinking about all the ordinary things Claire once promised would last forever. Sunday breakfasts. Gray-haired retirement somewhere near the mountains. Grandkids running through the backyard. People always talk about betrayal like a knife to the chest. They are wrong. Real betrayal is quieter than that. It happens slowly. In paperwork. In empty hospital chairs. In signatures placed carefully on documents while someone else fights to wake up. Around 3 in the morning, I reached for the call button just to prove my hands still worked. Not because I needed help. Because I needed to know something inside me still answered when called. By February, the snow around Denver had started turning gray along the highways. The kind of dirty slush that piles against curbs after too many storms and not enough sunlight. That was the month doctors finally cleared me to leave the hospital. I should have felt grateful, alive, hopeful. Instead, I remember standing outside St. Joseph Medical Center with one duffel bag in my hand and realizing I no longer had a home to return to. Mason drove me back to his apartment in Aurora in silence. His truck smelled like sawdust, old coffee, and the pine air freshener he always hung from the mirror, even though it never really covered the scent of construction work. Traffic crawled along Interstate 225 while cold sunlight flashed across the windshield. I watched people moving through ordinary life again. Women carrying groceries. Men pumping gas. Teenagers laughing outside burger joints. The whole world looked painfully normal. Like nothing terrible had happened at all. Mason lived alone in a second-floor apartment above a nail salon near a strip mall. Small place. Cheap carpet. A couch that leaned slightly to one side because one leg had broken years ago. But he cleared out his bedroom for me anyway and slept in a recliner for almost 3 months without complaining once. Good men rarely announce their sacrifices. They just quietly rearrange their lives around your pain. Physical therapy became my new full-time job. 3 days a week at a rehabilitation center where every room smelled faintly like disinfectant and determination. I learned how to trust my balance again. How to grip weight bars with hands that still trembled in the mornings. The scar near my hairline faded faster than the weakness in my left leg. Healing is strange that way. The things people can see disappear first. The deeper damage takes its time. Some nights, Mason would come home carrying takeout barbecue or greasy diner food, and we would sit in front of late-night sports highlights pretending life was simple. But eventually silence always circled back to Claire. Her absence sat in the room like another person neither of us invited. One night, after too much whiskey and not enough sleep, I finally asked the question I had been avoiding for weeks. Did she ever say why? Mason took a long breath before answering. She told people she could not spend the rest of her life waiting for a miracle. I nodded slowly like that explanation should have made sense. Maybe to some people it did. But I kept thinking about vows. About promises spoken slowly beneath church lights while families smiled from wooden pews. In sickness and in health always sounds beautiful until sickness actually arrives. Then you find out who meant it and who just liked the ceremony. A few days later, Mason handed me a manila envelope while we sat at his kitchen table. "You need to see this eventually," he said quietly. Inside were copies of the divorce filings Claire submitted while I was unconscious. My hands stayed calm, turning the pages, but my chest tightened with every line. Irretrievable breakdown of marriage. Emotional hardship. Recommendation for dissolution due to permanent medical uncertainty. Cold legal language reducing 12 years of life into paperwork. Then came another document. Sale records for our house in Littleton. Seeing that address hit harder than the divorce itself. I built the back deck with my own hands one summer, while Claire sat nearby drinking lemonade and laughing at how terrible I was with measurements. We planted maple trees in the backyard the year after we got married. We used to sit on the porch wrapped in blankets during thunderstorms, counting seconds between lightning and thunder like little kids. Now strangers probably park their cars in our driveway without ever knowing what died there first. That night, after Mason went to sleep, I sat alone near the apartment window watching snow fall beneath orange streetlights. Quiet, slow, endless. Somewhere in Arizona, Claire was living beneath palm trees and warm sunsets while I relearned how to climb stairs without gripping railings. I expected anger to come eventually. Rage, hatred, something loud enough to shake the emptiness loose from my chest. But it never came. What replaced it was colder than anger. Clarity. Clarity changes a man in dangerous ways. Not loud ways. Quiet ones. By the beginning of spring, I stopped asking questions about Claire entirely. No more checking social media. No more wondering whether she regretted leaving. No more late-night thoughts about Daniel Reeves and Scottsdale sunsets, and whether she still wore the silver necklace I bought her during our 5th anniversary trip to Estes Park. I realized something sitting in that tiny apartment while rain tapped softly against the balcony railing one evening. The version of my life I kept grieving no longer existed. Maybe it had died before the accident ever happened. Maybe I just had not noticed the heartbeat slowing down. Physical therapy ended in April. I could walk normally again, though cold mornings still stiffened my left leg like rust settling into old machinery. The doctors called my recovery remarkable. People love using hopeful words when they survive your tragedy from a safe distance. Remarkable, inspirational, miracle. They do not see the part where you sit awake at 2 in the morning wondering why surviving feels lonelier than dying almost did. Mason tried helping the only way he knew how. He found me small construction consulting jobs through old contacts around Denver. Mostly paperwork, scheduling, budget estimates for subcontractors who remembered me from before the accident. I appreciated it more than I said out loud. But every time I stepped near a familiar job site, I felt like a ghost wandering through somebody else's life. Men I used to supervise shook my hand carefully, speaking slower around me now, like trauma permanently lowered my rank in the world. One afternoon, after touring a commercial build near Lakewood, I sat alone in my truck staring at the mountains beyond the highway. Snow still capped the peaks, even though spring sunlight warmed the pavement. I remember gripping the steering wheel and realizing I could stay in Colorado forever and never stop seeing reminders of who I used to be. The hospital, the house, the roads, the restaurants Claire loved. Every corner carried echoes. Grief is easier to survive when the scenery stops talking back. That night, I packed a single duffel bag while Mason watched silently from the kitchen counter. "You heading somewhere?" he finally asked. I zipped the bag slowly before answering. "Yeah." "Where?" "I do not know yet." He studied me carefully for a moment, probably searching for anger or recklessness or signs I was falling apart again. But I was calmer than I had been in months. Calm enough to scare people sometimes. "You running away?" he asked quietly. I shook my head once. "No, I just think I died already once. Maybe I should stop living like I survived for somebody else." The next morning, before sunrise painted the sky pale blue behind the Rockies, I left Denver in my old Ford truck with $4,300 in cash, a toolbox in the back seat, and no forwarding address. Interstate 25 stretched north beneath endless gray clouds while country radio crackled softly through worn speakers. Mile by mile, Colorado disappeared behind me. Wyoming arrived first. Flat highways, windmills turning slowly against enormous skies. Empty gas stations where old men drank burnt coffee before dawn. I kept driving until silence finally stopped hurting. Somewhere outside Casper, I pulled into a roadside diner with cracked leather booths and a waitress named Patty who called everyone honey regardless of age. She poured coffee into my mug without asking questions. Funny how strangers sometimes show more kindness than people who promised forever. I rented a tiny cabin outside a town so small it barely appeared on maps. One grocery store, one bar, one traffic light blinking yellow after midnight. The mountains stood far away like sleeping giants beneath the horizon. Nobody there knew my name. Nobody knew about the coma or the divorce or the memorial service held while my heart still beat beneath hospital sheets. For the first time in almost a year, I could walk into a room without feeling pitted. That mattered more than I expected. A week later, I disconnected my old phone number entirely. No goodbye messages. No social media announcement. Nothing dramatic. Just silence. Sometimes disappearing is not revenge. Sometimes it is survival. The first winter in Wyoming nearly broke me, but not in the dramatic way people imagine. It was the quiet kind of breaking. The slow kind. The kind that happens while shoveling snow before sunrise with lungs still healing and joints stiff from old injuries. The cabin I rented sat 15 miles outside Sheridan, near a stretch of highway where 18-wheelers rolled through the dark like distant thunder. The roof leaked during heavy storms. The heater rattled like it might quit every other night. But the place had one thing my old life no longer offered. Peace. Real peace is not loud. It is not happiness or excitement or some perfect cinematic rebirth. Real peace is drinking coffee at 5 in the morning without your chest tightening from memory. It is walking through a grocery store without wondering who already knows your humiliation. It is sleeping through the night because nobody there remembers the man you used to be. I found work repairing equipment for ranchers and small construction crews around the county. Backhoes, hydraulic lifts, diesel generators. Honest work with cold hands and straightforward conversations. Men out there did not care about your past unless your work failed them. I like that. There was dignity and usefulness. By spring, my body started feeling like mine again. The limp faded. The scars softened. I grew a beard mostly because nobody around town cared enough to notice. Some evenings I drove old mountain roads with the windows down listening to classic country stations while snow melted along the fence lines. Wyoming has a way of making human drama feel small. Endless sky will do that to a man. One afternoon, nearly 2 years after leaving Colorado, I stopped at a feed store outside Buffalo to pick up replacement parts for a ranch compressor. That was where I met Eleanor Grady. Most people called her Ellie. She owned a woodworking shop beside the highway where handmade furniture sat displayed beneath strings of yellow patio lights year-round. Ellie was not flashy. No designer clothes. No polished Scottsdale energy. She wore denim jackets that smelled faintly like cedar dust and tied her blonde hair back with pencils when she worked. The first thing I noticed about her was how comfortable silence felt around her. Some people fill every quiet moment because they are terrified of what might surface if they stop talking. Ellie was different. She let silence breathe. We started slowly. Coffee after work. Long drives through the Bighorn Mountains. Burgers at a roadside diner where the waitress memorized our orders after 2 visits. She never pushed for details about Colorado. Never dug through my scars searching for entertainment disguised as concern. One night, while we sat outside her workshop watching snow drift beneath the streetlights, she finally asked if I had ever been married. I stared out at the empty highway for a long moment before answering. Yeah. She nodded once. Must have hurt pretty bad. Funny thing was, she did not ask for the story after that. No curiosity. No hunger for gossip. Just understanding. I realized then how exhausting it is when people treat your pain like a documentary they want narrated for them. Time moved differently after that. Quieter. Cleaner. I helped Ellie expand the workshop into a custom furniture business that slowly grew bigger than either of us expected. Tourists passing through Wyoming loved handcrafted mountain-style pieces. Lodges and resorts started placing orders. Then restaurants. Then hotels. Somewhere along the way, life stopped feeling temporary. For years passed before I noticed it clearly. For years without hearing Claire's voice. For years without checking whether she regretted leaving. The strange thing about surviving betrayal is eventually your revenge becomes accidental. You heal. You laugh again. You build routines that no longer include the people who destroyed you. And one day you wake up realizing they probably still carry your ghost while you barely remember the sound of their footsteps anymore. That realization should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt sad. Because once you finally stop loving someone, you also stop needing them to suffer. The first package arrived in October during the kind of Wyoming storm that turns the sky the color of wet cement. Wind rattled the windows of the workshop while snow spun sideways beneath the streetlights outside. Ellie was balancing invoices at the front counter when the delivery driver dropped a small padded envelope beside the register. No return address. No postage stamp from a company. Just Claire Reeves written carefully across the front in black ink. Ellie glanced at it once before sliding it aside with the rest of the mail. Neither of us thought much about it then. Hundreds of miles away in Scottsdale, Arizona, Claire probably opened that envelope inside some bright kitchen with marble countertops and expensive candles burning near the sink. She probably expected advertisements or holiday catalogs or another invitation to one of those polished neighborhood charity events she used to love posting online. Instead, inside the envelope sat a single photograph. Our wedding picture. Not the framed version people display in hallways. This one had been taken seconds earlier. Claire laughing with her head tilted back, while I looked at her like she was the safest thing in the world. No note. No message. Just the photograph. Mason told me later she called him the same night after nearly 5 years of silence. He was repairing drywall at a motel outside Pueblo when his phone rang. "Did you send me something?" she asked immediately. Mason leaned against his truck, smoking quietly before answering. "No," she hesitated. "Somebody mailed me an old wedding photo." Mason stayed calm. "Maybe throw it away." But Claire did not throw it away. That was the beginning of it. 2 weeks later, another package arrived. Smaller this time. Inside sat my old hospital wristband from St. Joseph Medical Center. The same white plastic band I wore during the coma with my name printed beside faded barcodes. Again, no note. No explanation. According to Mason, that was when fear finally entered her voice. Real fear. Not guilt. Not sadness. Fear. How would someone even get that? She whispered over the phone. Mason looked out across the motel parking lot while cold rain tapped against his windshield. "I do not know, Claire." Another long silence. Then she asked the question people always ask when old ghosts return. "Have you heard from Ethan?" Mason answered honestly. "Not in years." Which technically was true. We barely spoke more than twice a year by then. Sometimes Christmas. Sometimes birthdays. Men do not always need constant conversation to remain brothers. Around Thanksgiving, things escalated. Claire began receiving empty phone calls late at night. No breathing. No threats. Just silence. One call came while she and Daniel sat at a crowded restaurant patio, according to Mason. Another arrived at nearly midnight while she was alone in her car outside a grocery store. Human imagination does ugly things when guilt finally wakes up after years of sleep. Every shadow starts looking personal. Every coincidence feels targeted. Claire changed her phone number twice. It did not matter. More envelopes arrived over the following months. A receipt from the Littleton diner where we used to eat Sunday breakfast. A photograph of the mountains outside Denver taken from the exact hospital window beside my bed. Then came the worst one. A copy of the memorial service program with one sentence circled in red ink. "In loving memory of Ethan Walker. Gone too soon." Mason said Claire started sleeping with lights on after that. Daniel apparently dismissed everything as some sick prank at first. But even confident men get uneasy when the past keeps arriving without explanation. The strange thing was this. I knew absolutely nothing about any of it until February. Nearly 6 months after the first package arrived, Mason finally drove up to Wyoming unexpectedly during a heavy snowstorm. I found him sitting inside the workshop after closing time with exhaustion written all over his face. He stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "I think somebody is haunting your ex-wife," he said quietly. I laughed once because the sentence sounded ridiculous. Then he slid the wedding photograph across the table toward me. My smile disappeared immediately. There are moments in life where the past stops feeling buried and starts feeling patient. That was the expression on Mason's face the night he showed me the photograph again. Patient. Tired. Like something ugly had finally grown large enough to step into daylight. Snow hammered against the workshop windows while the heater clicked softly in the corner. Ellie had already gone home, leaving the smell of cedar wood and varnish hanging in the air. I picked up the wedding photograph carefully. My fingers froze the second I turned it over. Written on the back in black marker were 4 words. "You left too early." I stared at the handwriting for a long moment. It was not mine. Not even close. Mason leaned against the workbench with his arms folded tight across his chest. "There is more," he admitted quietly. Then he pulled out his phone and started showing me screenshots Claire had sent him over the past few months. Security camera stills from outside her neighborhood. A man standing near the edge of the street beneath a baseball cap. Too blurry to identify. Another image showed somebody parked across from her office building inside an old Ford truck around midnight. Then came the voicemail recordings. Empty static at first. Distant highway noise. Once, faint music playing low in the background. My stomach tightened immediately when I recognized the song. Chris Stapleton. Starting Over. Claire used to play it constantly during long drives through the mountains back, when our marriage still looked alive from the outside. Mason rubbed his jaw slowly. She thinks it is you. I looked up sharply. And you? He hesitated too long before answering. I do not know what to think anymore. The truth was unsettling for both of us. Because some details felt impossible. Whoever sent those packages knew things nobody else should have known. The hospital wristband had disappeared years ago. The memorial program had only been printed for close family and friends. Even the diner receipt came from a place Claire and I visited mostly during private Sunday mornings together. Somebody knew our life intimately. That realization settled into the room heavier than the storm outside. A week later, Claire called me directly for the first time in almost 5 years. I nearly ignored the unknown number until Wyoming instinct made me answer anyway. Most calls around there involved work, equipment deliveries, lumber orders, broken machinery. Instead, silence greeted me through the speaker. Thin breathing. Then her voice finally arrived, smaller than I remembered. Ethan. Hearing my name in her mouth again felt strange. Like opening a drawer full of old photographs you forgot you still owned. I stayed quiet. She inhaled sharply the moment she realized it was really me. Oh my God, she whispered. Not relief. Not joy. Fear. Are you doing this? She asked immediately. No hello. No apology. Straight to fear. That told me more than words ever could. I stared through the workshop window while snow drifted across the empty highway outside. Doing what? Another silence. Then her voice cracked slightly. Please stop. Those 2 words hit me harder than anger would have. Because suddenly I could hear it clearly beneath her polished Scottsdale confidence. Exhaustion. Real exhaustion. Like she had not slept properly in months. Claire, I said carefully, I have no idea what you are talking about. The packages. The calls. The pictures. Her breathing grew uneven. Somebody keeps reminding me about you. I closed my eyes slowly. There it was. The real wound underneath everything. Not guilt over leaving me. Not heartbreak. Fear that the man she abandoned had somehow returned from the dead emotionally untouched. It is not me, I answered honestly. She went quiet again. Long enough that I thought the call disconnected. Then softly, almost too softly to hear, she asked the question people ask when regret finally catches up with them. Why did you never come back? Outside, snow continued falling beneath the dark Wyoming sky while 18-wheelers rolled down distant highways like ghosts moving through the mountains. I thought about all the nights I spent rebuilding my life from pieces she left behind. The hospital rooms, the therapy, the silence, the years. Because you already buried me once, I said calmly. Then I hung up. After the phone call, I expected the strange packages to stop. Instead, they got worse. Not threatening. Not violent. Somehow that made them more unsettling. 2 weeks after Claire called me, another envelope appeared at her house in Scottsdale. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph taken through the windshield of a truck parked outside St. Joseph Medical Center during a snowstorm years earlier. In the corner of the image sat my old Ford pickup beneath layers of ice. On the back, written in the same black marker, were 6 words. Some people leave before the funeral. Daniel apparently wanted to call the police after that. Claire refused. Mason told me later she became obsessed with figuring out who knew enough about our past to keep reopening it piece by piece. She hired a private investigator for almost 3 months. Nothing. Security footage around her neighborhood showed no clear faces. The envelopes appeared without patterns. Sometimes at home. Sometimes at her office. Once inside her mailbox at the country club gym she belonged to. Whoever was doing it understood timing. Understood pressure. Understood guilt. By early spring, the tension finally cracked her relationship with Daniel apart. Mason heard it from one of Claire's old friends back in Denver. Too many sleepless nights. Too many arguments. Daniel accused her of hiding things about her marriage to me. Claire accused him of not understanding what she lived with every day. Funny thing about buried guilt. It eventually poisons innocent people too. One rainy afternoon in April, nearly 6 years after the accident, I walked into the workshop and found Ellie standing near the front counter, holding an envelope addressed to me. No return address. My stomach tightened immediately. She handed it over carefully. This came about an hour ago. I opened it slowly beneath the yellow shop lights. Inside sat a single folded note. No photograph this time. No memorabilia. Just one sentence typed neatly on white paper. She finally knows what silence feels like. I stared at the words while cold fear slowly settled into my chest for the first time since this entire thing started. Because until that moment, some part of me still believed Mason might secretly be involved. Maybe trying to punish Claire for what she did. Maybe angry enough to create this twisted ghost story himself. But Mason had never been to Wyoming since the snowstorm visit months earlier, which meant somebody else knew where I lived now. Ellie watched my face carefully. "Ethan," she said softly, "who is doing this?" I folded the paper slowly before answering. "I honestly do not know." That was the first completely true terrifying sentence I had spoken in years. 3 nights later, Claire showed up in Wyoming herself. I came out of the workshop near closing time and saw a black rental SUV parked beneath the streetlight across the road. Snow drifted lightly through the dark while the engine idled. Then the driver door opened. Claire stepped out wearing a long camel-colored coat with exhaustion written all over her face. For a second, neither of us moved. 6 years disappeared and remained all at once. She looked older. Not dramatically, just tired in the eyes. Like life had slowly sanded away whatever certainty she used to wear so confidently. I walked toward her carefully across the icy pavement while she stood frozen beside the SUV. "You found me," I said calmly. Her eyes filled immediately. I had to. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, less polished, less sure of itself. We stood there beneath falling snow and distant highway noise like strangers carrying the ruins of the same house. Claire looked around at the workshop, the mountains beyond town, the quiet roads disappearing into darkness. "You really built another life?" she whispered. I nodded once. "Yes." She swallowed hard before speaking again. "Ethan, I swear to you, I never wanted this to happen." I looked at her carefully then. Not angry, not bitter, just tired in a different way now. "That is the problem, Claire," I answered quietly. "You spent years only thinking about what you wanted." Then she finally broke. Not dramatically. No screaming. No collapse into movie tears. Just silent crying beneath Wyoming snow while the past stood between us like something still unfinished. Claire and I talked for nearly an hour that night beside the workshop while snow collected softly along the highway shoulders. Not once did either of us raise our voices. That is the strange thing about endings once enough years pass. The anger burns away first. What remains is usually exhaustion. She admitted Daniel moved out 3 months earlier after another argument about the packages. She admitted she had not slept properly in almost a year. Every unfamiliar car, every unknown number, every envelope in the mailbox felt personal now. "I know how insane this sounds," she whispered, wrapping her coat tighter against the cold. "But sometimes it feels like I am being punished." I looked at her quietly for a long moment before answering. "Maybe you are." Her eyes filled again after that. Not because I sounded cruel, because deep down she already believed it herself. We ended up sitting inside the workshop after midnight, drinking burnt coffee from paper cups while the storm worsened outside. The room smelled like cedar wood and machine oil. Ellie had gone home hours earlier, but I could still see traces of her everywhere. Her jacket hanging near the office door. Pencil sketches pinned beside lumber orders. Little pieces of a life patiently built instead of rushed. Claire noticed them too. "Are you happy?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard because it sounded genuine. Not manipulative, not strategic, just honest. I stared at the steam rising from my coffee before answering carefully. "I think I finally became peaceful." She nodded slowly like those words hurt more than if I had simply said yes. Then came the silence we had both been circling all night. "I did love you," she whispered finally. "I know you probably do not believe that anymore, but I did." I leaned back in the chair, listening to the wind rattle softly against the building. "I believe you loved the version of me that made life feel safe," I answered. "But when things became uncertain, you left before the story could get ugly." Claire looked down at her hands immediately because she knew it was true. People reveal who they are most clearly when life stops being convenient. Somewhere around 1 in the morning, she finally asked the question that had haunted everything from the beginning. If it was not you, then who sent those things? I studied her face carefully before answering. I think you already know. She frowned slightly. Then slowly, realization moved through her expression like cold water spreading beneath ice. Mason. The truth landed hard because suddenly all the details made sense. The hospital bracelet, the memorial program, the private memories only family knew. Mason never wanted revenge for himself. He wanted Claire to feel the silence she left behind, to understand what it felt like waking up every day with ghosts sitting beside you. I never confirmed it directly. Neither did he. Some things between brothers stay unspoken out of mercy. Claire cried quietly after that. Not loud, not theatrical, just tired tears from a woman finally forced to sit alone with choices she spent years outrunning. Before sunrise, the storm finally began calming down. Pale blue lights spread slowly across the Wyoming mountains while 18-wheelers rolled through the distance like shadows crossing snow. Claire stood near the workshop door holding her car keys tightly in one hand. I do not expect forgiveness, she said softly. Good, I answered calmly. Because that is not what this is anymore. She nodded once like she understood for the first time. Then she looked around the workshop one last time. The mountains, the roads, the quiet life she no longer belonged to. I really did lose you, she whispered. I thought about answering differently. Something sharp, something memorable. But the truth was simpler than revenge ever needed to be. No, I said quietly. You lost me years before the coma. That was just the first time you stopped pretending otherwise. Claire stood there another second beneath the pale morning light before finally walking out into the snow alone. I watched her drive away until the black SUV disappeared beyond the highway curve. Then I locked the workshop door, poured another cup of coffee, and listened to the silence settle peacefully around me again. Some ghosts do not come back to destroy your life. Sometimes they return just long enough to remind you why they no longer belong in it.